All right, hi everyone. Welcome to this module on a trellis for humanizing our organizations. I want to thank the Institute for Inspired Organizational Cultures for having me here. I think this is a really important conversation about the future of leadership and management, so I'm glad you guys are engaged in this. Part of what we're talking about when we talk about humanizing organizations is recognizing that we're in a bit of a transition between the way management used to be and the way it's going to be in the future. And what led us to discover that was realizing that in fact social media is shining a window on the fact that management, which is based in a machine way of thinking, but social media was based in more human principles. And so that's what inspired us to create this trellis. There's actually 12 different elements in the trellis, which we'll talk about in the segments to follow. Today I want to talk about a little bit the backstory and sort of how we got to where we are. And to understand the backstory, you have to understand that management itself was only invented 100 years ago. It was the early 1900s. A man named Frederick Taylor is actually known as the father of modern management. And he invented management by studying things like the most efficient way to shovel coal, or the fact that if you paid laborers a few cents more per hour, they would put more bars of iron on the railway cars. And interestingly, although that seems sort of pedestrian to us, all of management was based on that research. 100 years ago, we decided how to run our organizations, and it hasn't changed much since. Now, interestingly, you come along with social media, and it shows us a new way of doing things, because the mechanical approach to management, while it got us a lot of efficiency and productivity over the last 100 years, is starting to let us down, right? Our organizations are struggling to be agile in today's world where things change so fast. We're really struggling with employee engagement, right? The numbers in employee engagement are horrible. Maybe 3 out of 10 people engaged at work globally, and even 2 out of 10, 20%, are so disengaged they're actively sabotaging their own organizations. And the reason for this is that machines, which what our organizations are based on, are not good at engagement, and they're not good at agility. Interestingly, social media is really good at those things. Engagement is what social media is all about. The fact that you can engage your users in it and let the people who use it create it. That's what made it grow so fast. Google Plus managed to get 20 million users after their launch in a matter of 2 months. 20 million users in 2 months, and Google Plus, quite frankly, is pretty lame. Nobody really knows how to use it, but they jumped on that bandwagon because it tapped into something deeper. It taps into what makes us human. And so that got Maddie Grant and I, who's my co-author of the book, that got us thinking, how do we apply these ideas of being more human into organizations? And that's what led to this trellis. So when you look at the trellis, it's based on 4 core human elements: open, trustworthy, generative, and courageous. Okay, that literally makes up the left column in this trellis. And then when you want to say, well, how do we make those human elements become alive in our organizations? Well, you have to look at the 3 different levels in your organization. One is culture, the second is process and structure, and the third is individual behavior. And so those are the other 3 columns in the trellis. And so when you then look at how that plays out, you get the 12 principles that we're going to spend time talking about. And they're all there on the screen for you to see. That's what a human organization is. And that's what management and leadership is going to look like for the next 4 generations, something that your generation as college students are going to be very instrumental in leading. So I'll be really interested to hear how you make sense of this as we move forward. But we'll stop now, and then we'll do the next segment on open. All right, now we're going to dig a little more deeply into this trellis, and we're going to talk about the first human element, which is open. Now, we chose open first on purpose because we think it's sort of foundational. Being open and openness is very integral to what it means to be human. We like open possibilities, open minds, open spaces. We don't like to be, as human beings, we don't like to be controlled, confined, constrained. That's why prison cells are small. Okay? And social media also is really based in being open and decentralized. And I mean, think about open source software. You take the code and you make it available to everybody, and people collaboratively write their own software, the users of it. Social media is the same way. The people that we used to call the audience, they're the ones that create and distribute the content now. And then on the other side, management is decidedly not open. Management is all about control, following orders, doing things as you're supposed to do them as it's scripted in the strategic plan. It's not about that kind of openness, and it struggles with openness. It feels it's very chaotic. So if you want a human organization, you need to figure out ways to make open happen. And that means, again, according to the trellis, 3 different levels. It's going to be decentralization, systems thinking, and ownership. So decentralization is at the culture level. That means extending decision-making away from the center of the organization and towards the periphery. Not all of the decision-making. It's not like you give up all the control if you're in charge, but look for places where people can make decisions that they're not making them now. Zappos is famous for letting their call center employees make their own decisions about giving account upgrades or free shipping, because they know that for that organization to be successful, the people closest to the customer have to have that authority, have to be able to make those decisions, so they extend it there. At the process and structure level, it's about systems thinking. Systems thinking simply means our organizations are complex dynamic systems where things don't always flow in a linear fashion. And so for it to work, the whole system has to have a better understanding of how each part works. That's great in theory, but it doesn't work in our organizations because we created silos. We created departments where you have these deep expertise. And a lot of people say, oh, well, then we should just bust down the silos. But you can't. You need that deep expertise. What you need to be able to do is train the silos to take breaks every now and then and come back and work all together on one thing. If you had a big annual meeting where all the departments got together and worked only on that, that way I could be working with someone from another department, learn a little bit more about how they do things. And then when I go back down to my silo and start working my program, I start making better decisions that won't screw up that person's work later. But I got that by embracing systems thinking and making sure that's integrated in how we do our work on an ongoing basis. And then the third level, the behavior level, that's ownership. And we always talk in organizations how we want people to own their jobs. Take pride in it. Do that extra step even though it's not in your job description. But the way you get that ownership behavior is by educating every individual about how your organization works. And we don't do that. We hire them and we throw them right in expecting to be productive right away. Our employee orientation programs often consist of a 30-minute video and then 300 pages of manuals to read. That doesn't help people own their jobs. If you want them to own their jobs, you give them a real thorough understanding of how the organization works. You know how the military orients their new employees? They call it boot camp. And it usually takes about 8 weeks residential. But when those new employees leave that boot camp, they deeply understand the branch of military they're in. They know how things work, they know their role, they know everyone else's role. And the reason is, when they get into combat, they don't get to ask their commanding officer what to do. They don't get to consult a manual. They don't even get to consult their peers. They have to take action. And so they get ownership behavior, but they get that by investing in every employee and having a deep understanding of what it takes to run the organization. So an open organization requires a culture that's decentralized, processes that embrace systems thinking, and individual behavior that drives ownership by investing in their employees' knowledge of how things work. That's what it takes to be open. All right, now we're going to talk about the second element in the trellis, which is trustworthy. Again, trust is really central to what it means to be human. All of our closest relationships are built on trust. And if you have a close relationship where trust has been violated, we mourn that loss. It's that important to us. Communities are built on relationships where trust exists. You have to have it. Social media, similarly, very heavily based on trust. If you try and do social media in a way where people aren't authentic or people feel you're not telling the truth, it doesn't work. Social media that's exclusively about pitching marketing messages always fails. It needs that authentic, trustworthy, honest voice. But again, in organizations, traditional management, trust is not valued at all. We replace trust with control. We define the relationships, we define the structure of the organization, the job descriptions, and then you simply have to do that. If you don't do it, I fire you. I don't really need the trust. So human organizations need to rebuild trust into the fabric. So at the culture level, that's about transparency. It's about sharing more information than we do now. I love the story of Whole Foods. They actually share all of their salary and bonus data internally with all of their employees. Everyone at Whole Foods knows what everybody else makes. Something that honestly freaks people out when I tell them that, because that's so not how we do things. But they do it strategically. They're sharing their bonus data because they do their bonuses based on team performance. So they want the produce team in Wichita to understand that produce team on Long Island is getting bonuses. So they're succeeding. So they call Long Island and they find out what they're doing. They apply that knowledge locally and they adjust their practices and make it work there. So then when they succeed, Sacramento sees that and calls them. Whole Foods has created a system that is agile, that is learning from itself and implementing things differently. But they needed that layer of transparency to make it happen. So organizations need to look, what can we share with everybody that would enable that kind of agility, that kind of action? At the process level, it's about truth. Would you think, oh, doesn't everyone tell the truth? Well, yes and no. We have a lot of systems, processes, and structures in organizations that inhibit us from telling the truth. If I have a problem with somebody in another department, I'm not allowed to go deal with it with them. I have to go to their supervisor because it's in their department and I don't control that. That's a dynamic we have in human systems called triangulation, where you don't deal directly with the person you have a problem with, and it's horrible. It causes systems to malfunction. We know this, but we've created systems that prevent me from telling the truth. We need to redesign our organizations that enable people to speak the truth more directly to each other. And then at the level of individual behavior, it's about authenticity. Again, not something that we've really truly valued inside our organizations. We don't want people showing up being their true selves. We want them showing up doing what their job descriptions say. And that works to some extent. That gives us some efficiency and some productivity, but it robs us of the power that human beings bring to their work. So another Zappos example, one of their core values is literally, people are weird and that's okay. They let people show up. Their call center people don't read off of scripts. They can be whoever they want to be. They can make jokes. They can go off script. They can do that because Zappos knows that as human beings, we want to interact with other human beings. Real people, not people who are reading a script, but people who have a sense of humor and maybe are a little weird. As long as they're attentive to our needs and can meet our needs from a customer service point of view, that weirdness, that authenticity, that matters to us. That drives our engagement. That drives that customer engagement that has driven their success. So human organizations are trustworthy, which means at a cultural level they embrace transparency. At a structure and process level, they enable more truth, and at an individual behavioral, they support and reward individual authenticity. So we'll take a break there. The next one we'll talk about is generative. Okay, now we're going to talk about the third element in the trellis, which is generative. And this one I actually get more questions about the word. It's not used as commonly as some of the other words in the trellis. Generative basically means constantly growing, evolving, changing, turning into new and better things. Right? And that's obviously very important to human beings. We want human beings that are growing and developing and not, the opposite of generative is stagnant. Right? We don't want that as human beings. We want to be connected to people who are growing, and we want to be living in systems that are growing and developing. And social media is very generative. It has always been based on the idea that It might have been planned to be one way, but if it turns into something completely different, that's fine. Twitter was designed to be a system for sending a text message to a group of people in one organization. It was not designed to be a global communications platform that supports democratic revolution in North Africa, but it did. Because it was okay by becoming something new, something different, changing, growing, evolving, that's fine. Again, traditional management can't stand that. It can't stand things that are generative. It creates 5-year strategic plans that map out how everything is going to develop, and if it deviates from that, it makes all that work we put into strategic planning not work, which is one reason why strategic planning doesn't work. So we need human organizations. We need human organizations that have the capacity to grow and evolve and change on the fly. Which means at a cultural level, we need to really value inclusion. You can't develop and grow and change unless your system has the capacity to include difference. Because including difference is a critical component for innovation, for growth and change and learning new things. If everyone thinks the same way, you don't grow and change. So you need a culture that will value inclusion, and that's a challenge because we honestly don't give ourselves the skills to do that. You need to be able to have your conflict and work on communication because conflict comes with difference and communication skills with people who are different from you. We don't invest in that, so we end up shunning the idea of difference and have cultures that really don't value inclusion. Now at the process level, that's actually about collaboration. If you really want a culture that values inclusion, you need processes that enable people to collaborate. And we always say we want people that work well together, we collaborate, sort of play nicely in the sandbox, which is true, but that's not all that I'm talking about. I mean collaborating on things that we don't normally collaborate on, like brand. Brand is typically considered something that is controlled in the marketing department. You write up your perfect brand statements, and then you make everyone say them the same way. And you deliver that to the customer. Human organizations invite the customer in. They break that wall down. Starbucks has a site called My Starbucks Idea where they let the customers develop ideas that then get implemented in the products, services, and systems that Starbucks has. They're okay letting that wall down, letting their customers be a part of the collaboration for what their brand really means. Even collaborating on strategy, letting different departments work together on what the strategy looks like and on the implementation, and particularly letting different levels of the hierarchy work together on that. That's collaboration that we need to infuse in our processes and systems if we want to be more human. And then at the behavior level, we've got the culture that's about inclusion, collaboration at the process level. Behavior is about relationship building. We all want people, again, to get along and build good interpersonal relationships, but it's more than that. How do you help your people build relationships with networks? Because in order for this change and this collaboration to happen, we need to be connected more than just our little insular networks, our inside stuff. So that means we need to engage in social media better. How do you know what to share on social media? You have to know what's valuable not just to the 1 or 2 people that you know, but what's valuable to that whole network. Share things that's valuable to them, that gets reshared, that builds this online community that you can get with social media. But you need relationship building skills, both on that individual level and at a network level. So again, human organizations, at a culture it's about value and inclusion, at process and systems it's about collaboration, and at the individual behavior it's about relationship building, particularly with networks. Okay, the fourth and final human element that we talk about in the trellis is courageous. And we put this one last because honestly it's the hardest. Fear, as we know, is something that we all want to drive out of our relationships as human beings. We don't want to be driven by fear. We don't want to make our decisions based on fear. We want more we have aspirational goals that we'd rather be focused on. And social media actually got rid of fear earlier on. It's all about experimenting and trying new things. It has no problem with failure. It does not fear that because it knows it'll learn from it and try new things. But management has a big problem with courageousness. We do not like failure. We do not reward failure. In fact, if you fail, you typically get punished in organizations, which then causes us to sort of live in fear. Human organizations find a way around that. They find a way to build courage into how they do things. So at a culture level, that means cultures that really embrace learning. The way you get away from fear is that it becomes okay to fail, because when you do fail, you learn from it and you get better and performance improves. So if you can learn how to build learning into your culture, then the fear dissipates. The US military is actually pretty good at this with their after-action reviews. It's built into how they do things. They do a program, they engage in anything they do. When it's done, they all get together and talk about it. The lowest rank to the highest rank. Anyone can say, here's what worked and here's what didn't and here's why. They build learning into their culture, and it helps get that fear away. At the process level, since it's about learning and learning from failure, it's about building in ways to do more experimentation. Organizations are horrible at experimentation. If you want to build in the capacity to experiment more in your organizations, what you do is you create containers for it, right? Because no one wants to put everything up to experimentation. The head of W.L. Gore and Associates that makes Gore-Tex said, if you want to punch holes in the boat, do it above the waterline. Right? So find areas where people can experiment. Google does this with their 20% time. They say 80% of the time you work on the Google core business, but 20% you can try and experiment on stuff that might work, might not work, and that's okay. Because what they got out of that was something like Gmail, which was invented during 20% time. It was not a part of Google's core business, but it's become a huge part of what they do and a huge part of their profits. They got that by enabling experimentation. The third one at the behavior level, and this is a really hard one for people to get, it's personal development. If you want all of this human organization to work, you need really good humans in your organization, which means you need to invest in their development. I've worked with organizations that have built into their performance review process not a prove to me how well you did everything all year, but in their performance reviews is, who do you want to become? What is your destiny? Destiny actually gets mentioned in performance reviews in these organizations. Who do you want to become, and where are you headed in life, and how can we help you do that? That's investing in personal development, because those are the people that can do all of these 12 things that I've talked about. All right, so in human organizations, if you want to get into being courageous, at a cultural level, it's about learning. Processes are about creating space for experimentation. And at the behavior level, it's about supporting personal development. And so those are the 4 human elements. That's the trellis. Organizations that can integrate all of these 4 things, these 12 things really, into their organizations are going to start to see more and more success. And I particularly want you all to be thinking about this as college students, because most of you, I'm imagining, are part of this millennial generation. And I think, based on my analysis of historically what's happened, this millennial generation is not going to really be in charge, like and run things totally, but they're going to lead the charge into this more human organization, because you guys have grown up with this. You've grown up with social media. You've seen these things. These things are going to make more sense. And as you become the largest segment of the workforce, you have an opportunity to shape leadership and management more than anyone has in the last 100 years. So think about that and take advantage of it. I'm going to be really excited to see where you guys take it.